And welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded. And I have Peter Campion with me from the One Nation Party in Queensland. How you doing, Pete?
I'm very well, Neil. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Good, thank you. Okay, so Queensland voters go to the polls at the end of this month, being October, and you've currently got a Labor government running the state, which, just looking at the last election, they had quite a convincing win. 52 seats to 34 for the LNP, and there were 7 others, so it was quite a big, as has been the case in some of the other states post-COVID, or around the COVID time. It became, the electorate certainly wanted Labor there, or to at least back the current government. So what's your take in terms of, the mood in Queensland?
People are thoroughly sick, not just of Labor, but of the Liberals as well. A lot of us now regard Labor and the Liberal as effectively one organisation pretending to be two to give voters the illusion of choice. It really doesn't matter which branch we vote for, they're still going to do the same things, just that Liberals do them slower.
Okay. Right. So, in fact, I've been watching from a distance, and I think Labor's been quite desperate or wanting to set up government-owned petrol stations, and now a power retailer dealing in commodities that are actually extremely volatile when it comes to their the pricing mechanism that sits underneath them. You know, being government-owned, I mean, what could go wrong?
Well, it's almost like Stephen Miles and his cabinet have attended the Frankfurt School, and they've learned all the communist techniques that they think that this time they'll get communism right. And, you know, just because every communist or socialist or fascist government before them hasn't managed it, somehow they will. They'd be flat out organising a drunken session in a brewery. I
could understand the political attractiveness of making those announcements, but seriously, if you know anything about those industries, you really need professionals to run them.
Absolutely.
Now, you are a candidate for the election of Cook.
Yes.
Which is that top pointy bit of Australia.
Yes, so, it's 86.54% the size of Victoria.
Okay. And from top to bottom, I was just having a look before, it's about 740, 750 k's in a straight line, just from top to bottom.
It's actually a bit further than that. It's from the southern boundary of the electorate to the outer islands in Cape York is over 1,200 kilometres. It's a 2.5-day drive, and it's about $300 in diesel just to get to the tip of the Cape.
So, if people can't already picture it, if you had, and I was thinking beforehand, if you had a biscuit or something that was the shape of Australia and you snapped off the whole pointy bit, that's pretty much it.
That's Cook.
And that's not even the largest electorate in Queensland. It's the fourth largest.
No, yeah. Queensland's a big place. It's not until you've driven across it that you do realise quite how big. Flying over it doesn't do it justice because you're travelling at the best part of 800 kilometres an hour. You really have to drive it. And if you take the secondary inland roads where you can't just cruise on 110 kilometres an hour, then, yeah, it's a big place. It's dry. It's harsh. And it's a very hard place to roll infrastructure out, and there's also a massive disconnect between the regions and that little pile of sardine tin electorates down there in the southeast corner, which is the only section of Queensland that the Labor Liberal Uni Party have any interest in.
You're not the first to tell me that. The Shooters Union was telling me that there are 2 Queenslands.
Yes, there's very much 2 Queenslands.
So that electorate will taking place as, I guess, us Southerners are used to dealing with, which are places like Port Douglas, and you got Mossman and Cooktown and those sort of towns.
Yeah, the biggest town of the electorate's Mareeba, and it has quite a strong shooting community. They've got an excellent rifle range, a very good pistol range, and they also do shotguns on the same site. So you can just enjoy everything there.
Okay. Now, just talk a little bit about you. You were telling me beforehand, this is your 3rd campaign.
Yes. Even before COVID broke in the mainstream media, I was having serious doubts. I was seeing all the hallmarks of the typical globalist psyop being rolled out. And of course, I've been accused of being a conspiracy theorist by the mainstream media, which tells you that I actually have sources in alternative media that they would choose not to visit, not to talk about. And pretty much within about 6 weeks of it hitting our media, I was already pointing out major flaws in it publicly. I've been a letters to the editor writer for, get this, 48 years now. And at the time that COVID broke, I was criticising the climate change fiasco, the hoax that's behind that, in 14 separate media, mainstream media platforms, dead tree newspapers. And I was banned right across the lot of them for speaking my mind on COVID. And consequently, to have any sort of platform, I ran as an independent in Hill, which is the electorate I actually live in. I'm actually just the Hill side of the Hill-Cook border. And this was a last-minute decision. It was a very short campaign. I had no money. And I think I spent about $20 a vote compared to the Greens. They spent about $500 a vote. So, yeah, there's that. Also, I got to destroy the Greens and Labor candidates live to their faces at 7 different town hall meetings. That was just fantastic. And then in 2022, I managed to hook up with Clive Palmer's United Australia Party, which were actually pretty good. They provided a whole bunch of cork flutes, hats and T-shirts. We were still left to our own devices to actually campaign. And I got around the seat of Kennedy. Now, in both of those, I didn't expect to beat the incumbent Catters. That's Shane Knuth in the case of Hill, and dear old Bob Catter himself in the case of Kennedy. But it was good to get messages out there that the Catters weren't quite game to say at that point in the evolution of COVID. They're talking more openly about it now, to their credit.
Good. And just before we go on, just to be so people are confused, we're talking here about the Queensland seat of Cook, not to be confused with the federal seat of Cook, which is Scott Morrison's seat in Sydney.
It's funny you should bring that up. That was quite hilarious because your listeners may be unaware of this, but I'm Barnaby Joyce's father-in-law. And my daughter, my firstborn daughter, is his second wife. His 2 sons are my grandsons. Now, her socials went wild when One Nation announced that I was running in Cook, because the people in the Canberra-Sydney area, where Barnaby and Vicky are most well known, associated that immediately with Scott Morrison's old seat. And they said, your dad's running in ScoMo's old seat.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so she had about 24 hours of being bombarded with questions from every media agency on earth about that, which was just hilarious.
Small world. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, now you are no stranger to the shooting sports either.
No.
Tell us about your involvement.
Well, I was only thinking about this the other day. My parents were retailers in the town of Cairns back when it was quite a small town. I think it was 27,000 people in my childhood. And I distinctly recall saving up a deposit for a Winchester 30-30 lever action and finally paying off my lay-by, proudly carrying it openly down the street back to mum and dad's shop at 15 years of age. And nobody batted an eye. It wasn't the least bit scary. There's this boy walking along with a lever action 30-30. Everyone listening to this knows what they look like. And, yeah, it was completely unremarkable. Took it home, kept it nice and clean and polished and well-oiled, and occasionally went out with some mates to shoot some targets.
You said you're secretary of pistol clubs also.
These days I'm the secretary of a pistol club, and I was told that it was only about an hour a week's work, and oh gee, that just wasn't true now, was it? I feel like I got sold a pup there, but it is actually a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time getting my head around the regulations, the constantly changing regulations now that Labor is devolving into open socialism. The Community Safety Bill went through just recently. I still can't quite get my head around that, but apparently, if I understand correctly, even though under the 1992 High Court decision, I have a perfect right to free political communication. It was determined that even though we don't have a First Amendment style right to free speech in this country, that we do have the right to free political communication because that's essential to our political process. But even though I have that right, and I'm a political candidate and I'm an executive of a gun club, I still can't criticise the government because that, under this new Community Safety Bill, would give the government the right to come and take my firearms away, just regarding me a threat to their agenda. So this is just one reason why anyone that owns firearms for any reason needs to be looking very, very seriously at getting the Labor Party out of power and not replacing them with the Liberals. Now, this is a subject of contention. Barnaby and Vicky and I argue over this. They're not convinced yet that the Labor and Liberal Party have devolved just into one organisation, but they certainly behave that way.
Well, that story we've covered fairly recently out of what's happening in Western Australia, where the Labor government there is really given shooters an amazingly hard time, and the Liberal Party just ducked in alongside them. They voted with the government on the new change. You know, the Nationals are standing up over there, but it's sort of, I'm in two minds about sort of where they're at with that.
Well, the Nationals do at the federal level too. You have Keith Pitt, Barnaby Joyce, Matt Canavan holding the line against the far left Nationals such as David Littleproud, who have, his electorate, Maranoa, was an 87% no vote to the Voice, but he still wants to go ahead and push that sort of thing. So he's not representative even of his own electorate. And let's face it, the one constitutional obligation our parliamentarians have is to represent the will of the people, not the will of the party, not the will of the United Nations or the World Economic Forum. It's to represent the will of the people who put them in that chair. And they never do, which is, what we've come to expect, but it doesn't make it right. So there are the few holdouts in the Nationals, but the Nationals in Queensland have been extinguished. The LNP is the former Liberal National Party, and one thing they had to work out very hard was to get rid of the rump era of the Bjelke-Petersen Nationals. So they were most effective at that. They've even arranged that amalgamation in such a way that the Nationals name can't now be reclaimed for a political party. So this is why One Nation is taking over the old ground of the Nationals, and why Katter has also exploited that to some extent. Katter, unfortunately, still has a wide streak of agrarian socialism. And indeed, Katter himself, just as recently as 2022 on Sky News with Chris Smith, was telling us how he's of the hard left and he's still a CFMEU member after all these years. And that's not going to get a whole lot of shooters in Queensland excited, or really anyone that values their freedom, their right to communicate, or their medical autonomy. It's not going to get any of those people excited. So Bob has great potential to be an excellent statement, but he just needs to let go of that residual idea of redistributing other people's money being a good idea. And I can't see him doing that at his age, because I think he's 80. He's getting close to 80.
He would have to be in that area.
Yeah.
So, having a look at One Nation, I'll just put it up for you to have a look at. Obviously, it's not going to be good for the podcast, but just so we're clear as to what One Nation stands for, this is the policy on the website that we've got, and I'll just read it out. So One Nation supports responsible gun ownership and will preserve the current rules which allow law-abiding citizens access to firearms, whether it be for work, farming, sports-related activities. We do not believe that further stringent measures or regulations are required regarding licensing. One Nation calls for strict border security and tougher sentencing for gun crimes and traffickers. Is there anything, any views you have you would like to add to that? Because obviously it's a party policy, that's the policy you have to run with. Are there any additional thoughts that you might have in relation to policy?
Neil, were it up to me, we'd have a Second Amendment because, well, as you know, the reason the Second Amendment exists is because the citizenry of a country might need to repel armed invaders. They might need to repel criminals that want to invade their own home and kill their families. But they also need to keep the government under control. So that was the thing the US Founding Fathers really understood, having escaped the tyranny of the British, to establish a colony that was free of that sort of tyranny, the old money tyranny, the old money rules, the old money stacked deck. So they started off with the tripartite republican system, which is the three branches of government balancing each other, which is a very good idea. Then they thought about it for a couple of years and came back and added the first 10 amendments, the so-called Bill of Rights, the absolute right to free speech and the right to bear arms. But what that Bill of Rights actually represents is a curtailment of government. They put limits on government, and the failure to put limits on government inevitably causes a system to collapse over time. It will collapse inevitably into the sort of tyranny that we saw in Stalin's Russia and in Mao Zedong's China. And when these tyrannical systems collapse, they tend to kill a lot of their civilian population. So, the Holodomor alone is estimated to have killed 20 million people, and that was born of Lysenkoism, which was this fake science belief that plants, didn't need to be bred; they could be, imagined into being something different than what they were. In the same way, we've got that going on with the climate change alarmists at the moment. There's magical properties they attribute to CO2. Now, unless we can keep a government small, limited, and in its own lane, it's going to encroach into ours every single time.
I think, even for the most sceptical people around who might think, no, that's just a whole lot of baloney. I'm happy. I just like the way things are. I think every shooter has actually seen the government go outside that lane.
Yes.
You're of the age you obviously remember '96. Yes. We've seen this happen. You talk at home in terms of the government not protecting us, not representing us, and the authoritarianism that's sort of very clearly visible. Yes. in our world.
All those people that are happy now are happy for now. They're happy so long as it lasts. But the government, as it is now, can, with their monopoly on firearms violence, which is effectively what they've given themselves, can take away any individual's happiness at any time at the stroke of a pen. And that's not a safe place for us as shooters, for us as human beings, for our children or our grandchildren. And this is absolutely why we need to get the Labor Liberal Unity Party out of our governance, because they're just going to keep doing the same things incrementally. They're literally boiling the frogs. It's what I call salami slice politics. Well, they'll take a millimetre shaving at a time off our freedom, off our prosperity, off our right to quiet enjoyment of our lives and our environment and everything else. There was a time there that you didn't need a licence for pretty much anything. But now you need a license for absolutely everything. A story I commented on this morning in response to a Cairns Post story, I respond as a letter to the editor, but also I make a YouTube and a Rumble video about each one of those, is a coffee shop owner, and she's saying how her cost of administration has doubled in 3 years. The time commitment to meet the regulatory octopus and keep it at bay was as much time as it took to actually run her coffee shop. So that's just extraordinary. This is how prosperity is crushed out of existence. This is how the globalists get control, is by putting a lid on initiative and all the growth that comes from the human imagination. If you've got to have a license for everything, then it's almost impossible to start a small business now, to be an entrepreneur, to pick up some idea and run with it, because you've got the government stopping you, stymieing you, taxing you, regulating you, logically and illogically at every point of the compass. I mean, I'm a retired fireman, and you know what the Aboriginal people did prior to the white settlement to keep themselves safe from bushfire? They burnt stuff off all the time. They were constantly doing fuel reduction. You can't do fuel reduction now without all sorts of permissions, and in some areas you can't do it at all. I mean, that's very convenient for the government, isn't it? Because you have a great big fire, then you can blame climate change, can't you?
You reminded me, as you were talking about taxes, of Ronald Reagan's famous saying. I've got the quote here, which is, "Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidise it."
Yep.
That's good.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah. Look, having a look at One Nation's foreign policy, I'm okay with it. I like it. I'm not excited by it.
Yeah, same here.
But, yeah, I know. I didn't want to put you in a difficult spot, given the fact you're in a party. But, again, at glass half full, I'd like to take a bit of approach to it, and if people like you held the pen, then we might see different, hopefully even a better response next time.
Well, this is where One Nation differs a little from the Labor and Liberal Uni Party, because if you're in the Labor Liberal Uni Party and you say something that's outside the party lines, you're going to get smacked and smacked hard. Whereas One Nation is it's not quite like that. I'm free to state my personal view as well as the party's official position. So the official position, if it came to a vote in Parliament, would be that I would need to vote the party line if I didn't have a strong opinion on it. But if I did have a strong opinion, I'd be able to cross the floor. And of course, I'd never cross the floor to stand with the Labor and the Liberal Party on anything. I've been a political observer far too long to fall for anything like that. And I think pretty much everything that One Nation can do, it can do better than for the people of Queensland, for our prosperity, for our grandchildren, than the Labor and Liberal Uni Party, who obviously are working for the United Nations and the wealthy bodies who meet in Davos, which apparently is still a conspiracy, even though they have their giant websites and they're constantly funding people. And we've got people like, who was it? Kevy Rudd, the Milky Bar Kid, was in Australia recently and swanning around, hanging out with World Economic Forum people and United Nations people, and it's like, oh, this is normal. Well, no, actually it's not. These people are foreigners. They're not a government. They're not elected. They've actually got nothing to do with our governance. So why do our politicians, our governments, keep defying our will to implement their agenda? The only word for that is traitor and treason.
You, earlier in this interview, you talked about how the politicians are there to represent the electorate, and when you talked about how the candidates get smacked over the head if they step out of line, so true in Australian politics.
Yes.
It is, they are not free to...
It actually goes further than that, Neil. There's two ways that the Uni Party captures their political operatives. They're puppets. I like to think of them more as puppets because they're getting their strings pulled. The first way is they capture them with the ideology, which is obviously very easy to do with the Greens because they've been indoctrinated their entire lives. They believe impossible things. They'll believe 10 new impossible things before breakfast. And they're low IQ, generally low information. They don't understand chemistry or physics. If they did, they wouldn't be of the left. They wouldn't be climate alarmists. Now, the other way is what back in Caesar's time was called the bronze or gold offer. So the gold was if you did what you were supposed to do in the Senate. When you finished your Senate career, you'd get a nice reward, a nice bag of gold to take away with you and live on in retirement. If you didn't do what the powers behind the throne wanted you to do, you would get the bronze. In Caesar's case, it was the bronze dagger in the ribs. That evolved to obviously the lead or silver offer, with the lead being the double tap to the back of the head. That was a bit obvious. JFK was probably the last one of those. And, they'd done, there's quite a lot of Democrats that killed quite a lot of political people before that. I think there's, going all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, really. But that's just in the US, by the way. There's plenty of examples of it in Europe and the UK too. But the silver offer is where the parliamentarian... these days the lead is rather the parliamentarians told, look, your wife, she's going to have a dental appointment and there's going to be a mysterious accident while she's under anaesthetic and she's not going to make it. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry to tell you that, but this is what's going to happen unless you vote our way. And of course, if you do vote our way, at the end of your parliamentary career, we're going to give you a sweet gig on a board of a major company where you'll turn up for 3 hours a month and get $300,000 a year for your trouble. That's the modern lead or silver offer. And this is why so many parliamentarians seem to leave for no particular reason and then end up with these really well-paid jobs that they're just not qualified for.
Yes, and all that time in the Qantas lounge as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to this is a really fascinating look at the broader world of politics, I've got to say. The seat of Cook, the one you'll be contesting.
Yes.
You have fewer candidates than last time, and in fact, I think the candidate from One Nation was a professional boxer.
Yes,
female.
Yeah.
So this time you're up against Labor, the LNP, Canada, Australia and the Greens, so there's no independence. It's going to be hopefully a simpler, flow of preferences.
Yes, there was one independent, but he pulled out.
Okay. Currently held at the moment by Labor.
Yep, Cynthia Liu, Mrs. Invisible, they call her up there.
Gee whiz, how about that?
Well, a member for Yam Island.
Okay. And it's marked as, on the ABC side, as being safe Labor by about 6%.
Yeah, okay. There's a reason for that. That they get a 6% margin, and it's not. People tell me, Pete, there's no such thing as election fraud in Australia. It's like, really? Have you sat there and considered the flaws in our system? How easy it is to stack the pre-poll ballot boxes? Because it is easy. And when you've got a large block of Aboriginal voters living on remote communities, it gets even easier because, mate, rules apply less and less the further you get from Brisbane. And in some of those communities, I'm not saying it happens in all of them, but in some of them, the locals get picked up in the community bus, they get driven up to get their names ticked off, and someone gets their ballot, takes it out into the back room, fills it in on their behalf, and pops it in the ballot box for them. And you can guarantee that that's going to be a Labor operative, because that's how the left works every single time. That's just one way it's done. And another way is they say, look, Labor's going to give you free stuff. But, okay, let's look at this. It doesn't matter who's in charge. Before I was a career fireman, I was a Social Security field officer covering that exact area, covering Cape York, actually from Cardwell North. That was the 80s and 90s, and those were the days, before society descended into the level of mistrust that exists now. There's no way now I would go around randomly knocking on people's doors on behalf of the Commonwealth Government, telling them they'd been caught committing dole fraud and they had to appear in court. Not by myself, not unarmed or without any sort of communications device, which is what we were doing back in those days. But I covered all of those areas, and what I found was that they love the idea of the free money, of the sit-down money, and it's just a matter of saying to them, well, that Liberal man, that One Nation man, he's going to take away your cheque. It's just your cheque. In those days, it was a cheque, And so keeping the cheque was all important. So obviously they'd vote for whoever was going to give them the cheque. Now on that, those remote communities have been kept in poverty quite consciously and deliberately by the Uni Party. They've been maintained in that state of poverty despite the $40 million a day, I think it is, that we tip into them. We learned that during The Voice. Because they're run as socialist enclaves, and the money goes to a couple of select groups there, primarily through their land councils, and it doesn't filter down to the people on the street. So the way to actually get rid of the poverty that's endemic and has been, well, I'm in my 60s, for the entirety of my life, I started at the DSS when I was 18, is to free them from that tyrannical socialist model, to see a socialist bubble, a socialist enclave like those communities embedded in a prosperous capital system can never collapse the way it would automatically if left to its own devices. So, pardon me, until we get the socialism out of the communities by, well, among other things, allowing the locals to have property. They're not allowed to buy a quarter acre to build a house on and own the house outright. They're not allowed to buy a half acre to build a mechanics workshop on, or a service station. Some of the people that actually live there are incredibly bright. Some of them are the best mechanics you'd ever hope to come across. Mm-hmm. Why isn't there a string of mechanical workshops from one end of that electorate to the other? Well, because the regulations that they're run under don't allow that to happen. It all has to be a bureaucrat's idea before it can be implemented. And frankly, the socialist model that the Labor Liberal Uni Party have been inflicting on the Aboriginal community is fine for them to get votes in the inner city bleeding heart electorates who have never been even onto a dirt road, much less into an Aboriginal community. And that's why they keep them oppressed and suppressed as they do, because it's by keeping the Aboriginal people as victims, they can each point the finger at the other and use it to get votes off really dopey people that spend their whole lives in air conditioning.
Okay. The seat is So Labor, as I said, at the moment is reported as holding the seat as a safe 6%, but that obviously is the context of the statewide picture, as it
Yes.
was back in 2020, as I said, on the back of COVID, where, and the tide has definitely been turning against Labor. So I don't think it's at all correct to say it's a safe Labor seat anymore.
Well, in 2017, Labor had a particularly, I guess useless would be the way to describe him, chap in as the member. He was also a member from a community, the way Cynthia is. He ended up being kicked out of the Labor Party and sitting as an independent. But he was so held in such low esteem by the voting population of Cook, which obviously includes a lot of white people. There's a lot of people in Mareeba and Mossman and Port Douglas and Cooktown that are just like in any other town, only they're further from Brisbane, so they're probably a bit better connected to reality, who was so resentful of the treatment they were getting from the Brisbane Labor government that it came down to two-party preferred between One Nation and Labor, and that was when Jen Sackley ran for the seat. Now, Beaver Neal didn't get quite the same showing, perhaps because she was young. Maybe people thought she was too young for the job. I don't know. But anyway, that's they thought that Cynthia might be, but now there's been 7 years of Cynthia, and well, the other name that the locals in Cook have for her is Harvey Norman, because 7 years no interest. But she's just literally never there. Nobody sees her. Nobody hears from her. The only time you actually hear from Cynthia is when there's an election campaign on. And I've now been to two community events where all the candidates have been present, and I'm flat out understanding what she's saying, let alone being impressed by it. There's been an irrational fear of firearms built, quite consciously and deliberately, by the globalists through their controlled uni-party governments, and they exist in every country. I mean, you've got the MAGA Republicans and you've got the rhinos in the US. So the rhinos are the Republicans in name only. They're the ones that let Trump down through his first term. And the Democrats and the rhinos are more or less the same party. In the UK, you've got Labor and the Tories. It's repeated in France and Germany and everywhere, in New Zealand. So they've also got the corporate-controlled legacy media. So obviously you've got the alternate media, and I've got a list of several hundred alternative media sites that will give far more accurate news than 7, 9, 10, their ABC or any of the News Corp or 9 newspapers. But those two groups, the globalist-controlled governments, the globalist-controlled media, have been demonising firearms above any other, and that's because firearms have been widely used to hold off an oppressive force, either an enemy force or a domestic government force that's working against the will of the people. However, they're by no means as deadly as they're made out to be. Like, if you consider the 2016 Nice truck attack, in less than 5 minutes, a terrorist driving a 19-ton truck mowed down, I forget exactly how many, I think 83 people and killed them, and took out another 434, something like that. It is 86 and 434. That was what I jotted down in my preparatory notes here. So no one with a bolt action or even a semi-auto and a pile of mags is going to get anywhere close to that. But people will skip across the road in front of a truck and not think twice about it. But if I was to walk down the street as a 15-year-old with my 30-30 in 2024, people will be having conniption fits. And then, of course, as a fire investigator, I can tell you the damage that you can do with a box of matches. And if you look all the way back in time to the 1903 theatre fire in the US, I'm just trying to see where, the Iroquois Theatre, that's right. That was 602 dead, 250 injured in one crowded theatre. Admittedly, the fire exits weren't particularly good, but the point is that you can cause a lot more harm with matches than you can with a firearm. Matches or a truck. And then you've got the Jonestown massacre, where a pretty convincing chap managed to kill 914 people by getting them to drink the poisoned Kool-Aid. Well, does that pale into comparison with the number of people that were tricked bullied or coerced into getting a COVID jab. Yeah, if you follow some of the alternative media outlets, you'll learn that there's possibly as many as 20 million people that were bumped off the mortal coil by that particular concoction.
Yeah, drinking the Kool-Aid, that's where it comes from, the Jonestown's massacre, and it actually wasn't Kool-Aid, it was actually Flavour-Aid. And poor old Kool-Aid has copped it ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's your shooting going?
I love it. I participate in a range of different pistol and rifle styles. I don't do shotguns so much anymore. I just don't have the time for them. But the standard pistol match with the maximum score of 600, I'm on the leaderboard for that. Actually leading the leaderboard for this year for that on 544 with my trusty Ruger Mark IV in stainless steel. But I also shoot the action and military matches with my trusty CZ75 in 9mm. That's a pretty useful tool, that one. And I'm actually thinking about doing a bit of IPSC. I'm getting a bit stiff in the knees. I've had one knee replaced and the other's due. So I'm not quite as agile as I once was. But it's quite a fascinating sport. And also, it's quite an expensive sport unless you reload. And so far, I still don't reload. And also, pistol powder was just about non-existent in Queensland, possibly elsewhere as well, for quite some time. But I still had a few thousand reloads on hand, and I still participated in the 9mm matches as much as I could. But yeah, there's pistol shooting. We actually just arced up again our old rapid fire matches. So I've got a lightweight Mark III for rapid fire, which allows you to move and regain your sight picture very, very quickly. There's actually less than half the weight of the stainless steel Mark IV. It's a fascinating thing. It's the Mark III polymer chassis with the Packlight barrel. It's a alloy barrel with a stainless steel liner. Weighs, I think, 20 ounces compared to nearly 43 ounces for the stainless steel Mark IV.
Are you going to get Barnaby along?
I do hope to get him up here. The trouble is, every time he does come up here, he's flat out. You know, everyone wants a piece of Barnaby's top. My wife complains endlessly. You can't go shopping with Barnaby because it takes half an hour to get down one lane to the supermarket. Barnaby is incredibly widely loved in his electorate. And even up here, he can't, like, he comes and visits us, he can't walk down the street. Oh, Barnaby, you know. People tugging at his shirt hem, effectively. And then there's the media, the way they attacked him and her when their relationship started. He'd been separated from his wife for 8 months at that point. 8 months. And these little girls he ran out on, 3 of them were adults and had moved out of a home, and the 4th one was in her final year of boarding school. And they all attended boarding school from age 10. So spare us the hand-wringing from you lefty loonies in the media world. My goodness, don't get me... You're winding me up, Neil, I'm sure of it.
I could spend hours doing this. Unless you won't. No, that's been fantastic, Peter. I really, really appreciate your time and the very wide-ranging discussion we've had. It's been entertaining. It's been very good.
I pull no punches. I keep no secrets. I do not tell lies, which probably makes me an entirely unsuccessful political candidate. But hey, you know, for a little while there, I get the platform, get to spread the message, drop a few truth bombs, and if there's an audience of thousands, then it's a much more cost-effective venture than trying to educate one low-info lunatic leftist at a time, which was why I never engage in social media comments and that sort of thing. It's just not worth it.
Yeah, I know. I'll send my regards to Kevin Rudd when you see him, please.
Yeah, the Milky Bar kid. Oh, look, honestly. Just look back at our politicians. Look back at our leaders. Have you heard of the Dog Kings of Norway or the Dog Kings of Scandinavia? So back between the 9th and the 15th century, there was a bit of conquering of neighbouring principalities going on, and the Trondheim region in particular. And one of the guys that was really good at this, when he conquered a neighbour's kingdom, he would install one of his dogs as their king, and it was the way that he insulted their entire population. And the most famous of those dogs was Saur, Saurr, and Saur was eventually killed in a dogfight. But the point was that was how this guy told the conquered population that they were just so useless that he might as well just rule them with his dog. And this is what we've had with ScoMo, with Albo. This is what New Zealand had with Ardern, Canada with Trudeau, the US with Biden and now Harris, and the UK with Starmer. I mean, my goodness, could you get people that were more incompetent, with less runs on the board, with less intelligence, with less historical knowledge? No, I don't think you could. So what is that other than the globalists insulting whole global national populations, at least, by saying, you're so dumb, we've given you Albo and Chris Bowen. But furthermore, you know what it's designed for, Neil? Is eventually they want us all to beg for their competent, corporate-run, technocratic global government to relieve us the anguish of having to put up with our clearly incompetent domestic governments, because it doesn't matter whether we swap in the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, we still get the same thing.
You just hit a point there. If you look at going back in time to the 50s and 60s, when you had your left and you had basically your conservative right,
yes.
There is no conservative right now.
No.
It's gone.
Yep. That's the Gramscian left's long march through the institutions.
Yeah. So, choices for voters this month's election, I think it's pretty clear. And this is not just your message, it's certainly ours as well. Labor, put the Greens last,
yep.
But Labor and the LNP have to be way down the ticket. They and do not deserve your vote. There are, fortunately, some pro-gun parties up north. We don't quite have that menu down south, but we're talking about Queensland at the moment, where you've got Katter, you've got yourselves, One Nation. So I think the message is very clear. Look for these parties. Don't just think, okay, it's Saturday, I've got to vote, I've got to go to Bunnings, I've got to go and pick up my kids, and by the way, I'm going to vote and just mark the ballot paper, get over and done with. No, think about it. Make a conscious choice for, One Nation and the like, because otherwise you're going to end up with another 4 years of the same.
And above all else, don't vote Labor just because your dad voted Labor.
Kick those habits. Those habits. It might have been okay 40 years ago, 50 years ago. It's not okay today. It's simply not okay.
Yeah,
you are going to lose your guns if you vote Labor, basically.
Absolutely. I've got a mate, we've been mates since our mid-teens, and he voted Labor because his dad voted Labor. His dad voted Labor because his granddad voted Labor. And it took me years of one-on-one coaching to help him understand why voting Labor now was a bad idea. And this is why I don't debate lefties individually. This is why you need a mass platform such as your podcast or YouTube or Rumble or, Twitter, well, X as it is now. No good going on Facebook. He just gets censored. In fact, YouTube, well, I've already been taken down once. I've only put about 100 videos up there, so, yeah.
Because otherwise you're voting for people, in your words, who've got less runners on the board, less intelligence, and something else you mentioned. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I can't either now. It'll be on the tape.
It'll be there. Okay, Peter Campion, look, that was fantastic. I really appreciate your time. Good luck with the campaign.
Thank you, sir.
One Nation candidate for the election of Cook at the Queensland State election coming up later this month, being October. So, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Neil.